Hello, happy Tuesday. Doing the clue recap for the blind tasting clues for last Thursday's mystery grape, which was Grenache, Garnacha, and our blind tasting benchmark region was Priorat. So this is one that I've been working on quite a bit. This Saturday, we're continuing our blind tasting theory plus blind tasting webinar series, and we're going to hit Grenache. So we're going to hit, of course, Côte d'Aron, a little bit about the rosés at Grenache-based, and then, of course, this big one from Spain. And so even though it's a blend, and that's something you got to keep in mind, Carignan, it can have Cab in it, it can have Syrah, it can have Merlot. Grenache tends to be the main grape, but there's a lot of unique circumstances in Priorat that makes this expression of Grenache different than what you typically think of with Grenache. And so that was one thing I really encouraged you guys as you guys were looking at the clues, is to keep in mind that blending component and, the unique circumstance of terroir. So let's go over the clues and see how they work. So clue number 1, red and black plum. Clue number 2, red and black berry. So right off the bat, you're seeing red and dark fruit. So whenever you have your glass, you're doing your blind tasting, pay attention to the type of fruit that you're getting. Don't just mark down plums, cherries, berries, whatnot. Mark the nature of the fruit, the color of the fruit, the nature of the fruit. Is it fresh? Is it dried? Because that tells you quite a bit about the circumstances that those grapes came up in and the climate. So having that mix of red and dark fruit gives you a little bit of clues that we're not dealing with just a straight cool climate, and we're not dealing with just a straight warm climate. We're dealing with a climate that's going to have some mix of influences here. Continuing, clue number 3, crushed rock. Kind of a savory, earthy, and yes, kind of rocky, minerally note. This is something that you tend to see a little bit more in old world wines versus new world. Yes, it's a very broad generalization, but those rocky, dusty, earthy notes you want to think about with a lot of that savoriness from old world type wines. And Priorat, that dark slate liquorella, there's definitely that rockiness that seems to come from those wines. Then clue number 4, I had pretty much a big old spice rack area from a grocery store, because there's a lot of different spice components. And this is also where that blending aspect of Priorat comes in. Dried herbs, different types of spice, even black pepper spice you can pop out in there. Usually we associate black pepper more with Syrah, but Grenache and Carignan can bring that in quite a bit. But there's that, again, playing off that savoriness on here. These are not fruity wines. These are wines that have a savory note. And so if you're picking that up, savoriness in your glass while doing a blind tasting, you generally, again, want to think a little bit more towards the regions and the culture that emphasizes more savory notes versus more fruity notes. And that is definitely where we're at in Priorat. Clue 5 was black licorice. This does play a little bit with, you could say, a spice component. A little bit of that star anise, fennel, black licorice, especially in a warmer climate, can bring up that note, more black licorice-y note to it. You can also say there's a little bit of play with oak that sometimes can bring out that note. Clue 6, dark chocolate. And this is another thing that often a lot of people associate with oak. And Priorat in the 1980s, 1990s definitely went through a phase where a lot of French influenced winemaking kind of revitalized the area. So new French oak barrels were a big component of some of the big names there. That has dwindled a little bit, but it's still very present. You will get Priorat wines that will have vanilla, baking spice, and then dark chocolate notes to it. So those were the flavor clues. Now let's get into the structure clues. Medium to deep ruby. I could have probably even said some slight purple hues, because especially depending on what's blended with it, can add a purple note. I kind of stuck more towards the Grenache aspect of it, which is more ruby on there, but it is more of a darker ruby than what you typically associate with Grenache. A better comparison versus the Southern Rhone, I would say, is to compare it to a varietal Grenache from Australia. A warm climate Australia Grenache looks like almost like a darker Pinot with that. While you get to Priorat, you'll definitely notice how much darker the color is. Intensity, medium plus to pronounced. There's a lot of things going on in these wines. There's a lot of intensity here. And this is where we're starting to get into what is unique about this area of Priorat. Well, one, we associate it, northeast Spain, that Mediterranean climate. Not necessarily. There is obviously northern Spain, there's the warmth, there is that Mediterranean close by, but Priorat is very sheltered. Mountain ranges all around. It's almost like a bowl surrounded with mountain range. In fact, the Montsant region, kind of the baby brother to Priorat, is one of the things that surrounds it, almost like a donut in the middle. There's Priorat. That shelters this area quite a bit. And it shelters it from a lot of that Mediterranean influence. So it is a little bit more of a continental climate. And when you think continental, think about wide diurnal temperature range from the daytime highs to the nighttime lows versus a Mediterranean climate, which is a lot more consistent. It's not as wide of a range. When you get that wide range, that helps maintain acidity, maintains freshness, and it also helps build intensity on here. So we get into acidity here. Grenache by itself is more of a moderate acidity grape here. Carignan, when you add that to the blend, will definitely jack up the acidity. So with a lot of the Priorat wines, medium plus is what you're thinking about, especially with that continental influence here. And then that medium plus to pronounced intensity here. Medium plus to high tannins. So there are going to be some big tannins. Carignan will bring that. Grenache by itself is more moderate. But even here, the Grenache is different. We have very infertile, rocky soils, very, very low yields from the bush vines, and old vines. If you actually see old vines on the label, it is regulated here. So it is legit old vines. It has to be at least 75 years of age or older. And so the maximum yield for the region is 39 hectoliters per hectare. Producers would laugh at that because realistically, they often get around 5 to 6 hectoliters per hectare on it. I mean, it's fairly dry, around 500 to 600 millimeters of rain there. That really fast draining, rocky soil, low fertility. These are yields that we're thinking about, like if we go to Sauternes, top Sauternes estates are getting around 10 hectoliters per hectare. And here we are in Priorat for red wine, 5 to 6 hectoliters per hectare. That's going to affect quite a bit. I mean, obviously it's going to affect the intensity that we're getting here, affect the concentration of everything. Those vines have to compete. They have to struggle to get things ripe, and it's going to impact the price. And so when I always do these games here on Clue 6, I give you all the structure notes, and I include 2 context clues at the bottom with the quality range and price points. Here, I included the quality range as from good to outstanding, and the price point. Always look at that and think about those. The price point range here was premium, so starting out at premium to super premium. It is really difficult to make these wines inexpensive. You think also the conditions of the vineyards, very steep slopes, those rocky slopes. When they're planted, the costaires, kind of looks like costers, but I guess costaires is supposed to be the right pronunciation. Those could have up to 8,000 vines per hectare. So really, really tough. You can't mechanize them on those steep slopes. So everything has to be done by hand. Maybe you can get lucky and get an animal, a mule involved to help out. All that labor adds up to the price there. So always focus on those context clues for these games. Getting back to the structure, I mentioned the medium plus acidity, medium plus to high ripe tannins. So warm climate, those are going to be ripe tannins. They'll be present, but they'll be ripe. Full bodied, high alcohol, easily go over 14% with these wines. And then, as I said, good to outstanding and premium, super premium. So that is kind of the breakdown with these clues for Garnacha from Priorat. I do have today's game already up and live. You can start looking at the clues now. It's more of our geeky game. We're picking out a grape from New Zealand that you probably don't think of immediately when you think of New Zealand. So it'll be a little bit of a new discovery for some folks. And with that, you guys have a good one.